Ntasha Bhardwaj is a doctoral candidate at the School of Criminal Justice at Rogers University and founder at the South Asian Institute of Crime and Justice Studies. As a researcher, she explores the impact of gender and gender inequality on crime and fear of crime in South Asia. Her dissertation project, exploring pathways to incarceration among Indian and Sri Lankan women, is mixed method study investigating the pre-prison lives and experiences of 180 women incarcerated in India and Sri Lanka. Ntasha's research agenda is anchored in the goal to build on the limited yet growing criminal justice research in the South Asian context. She has received 2 awards from the Division of Women and Crime, American Society of Criminology, for her dissertation research. She has teaching experience at Rogers University, and her research has been published in the Journal of Research on Criminal and Delinquency and the European Journal of Criminology. She has presented her work in various international conferences, and we look forward to her presentation. The presentation title is Exploring Pathways of Incarceration Among Indian and Sri Lankan Women. Tasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ido, for that amazing introduction. So I'm just getting started. Here we go. I think you can see my screen. All right, yeah. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my dissertation research. As Ido already mentioned, the title is Exploring Pathways to Incarceration Among Indian and Sri Lankan Women. So it's a study that I set out to do in 2014 with my advisor, Professor Jody Miller. And the idea was to build on women's experiences in prison, but more importantly, women's experiences in South Asian contexts. How do we do this? I use a mixed methods approach that basically looks at life event calendars. I'll talk a little more about that, and qualitative life history interviews. So the idea was to tap into women's lives and understand what was going on so that I could come up with patterns towards crime prevention, but also towards policies that could address the needs of women who are currently incarcerated. So the data collection was carried out in 1 prison in Sri Lanka and 3 prisons in India. So let me just tell you a quick snapshot of what's going on, right? So currently, globally, around 714,000 women are in prisons. Women make up around 6% of the total prison population in the world. There are reasons like low socioeconomic status, women with histories of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, serious mental illnesses, and then there are issues with not being able to cope well that all kind of contribute to why women end up in prison more. What's interesting is most of this research is set up in the global north, right? So as I'm sure all of you know, there are differences, right, regionally, contextually that exist, and that are not just social, political, economic differences, but cultural differences that, yes, we have stories about why people end up in prison in the West, but you can't really extrapolate that. And that's part of the reason that I chose to do this work, because when I was studying criminology in India, I felt like context-specific definitions were not there. So I needed to definitely tap into how I can kind of make a case for why women end up in prison in India. So let me start by telling you a little bit about what we know, right? So we know that women end up because of issues with substance abuse and stuff. So why did I choose specifically India and Sri Lanka? Because if you look at it, a lot of times they get listed together, right? They're listed together. People don't really know where they are on the map. Culturally, we think there are a lot of similarities. But actually, as I demonstrate when I go through my presentation, there are a lot of differences in these 2 contexts, right? So this is what India and Sri Lanka look like if you look at the map, right? Sri Lanka is an island nation. The total population is 21 million. You look at India, it's a population of 1.3 billion, very different. Look at the religious makeup of India. The majority of our population, I live in India, so I'm going to refer to it as R, is 80% are Hindus, 13% are Muslims, and then Christians. Totally different in Sri Lanka. You have women, the population is Buddhist, followed by Muslims and Christians, right? So the commonality between the two setups, the best way to understand is they were both colonized. Sri Lanka was colonized by the Dutch and the Portuguese, but I think most important to understand is that both these contexts had British influence. So what they did, right, because I don't have too much time, what they did for the status of women is they wanted to kind of mirror the status to what British Victorian women looked like. So this really created tight definitions for women's identities in India and Sri Lanka. The state started to interfere with marriage, access to divorce, stripped women of a lot of economic rights. And I think at the end of the day, as much as we're grateful for the things that the colonizers brought, it really stripped women of a lot of rights in both contexts, which is very relevant to what I'm going to talk about next. So if you look at the current research on India, you know that women end up in prisons because of caste divides. They are disproportionately incarcerated for violent crimes, right? And if you look at Sri Lanka, it's more about women tied into their sexuality because there's a rigid division of labor in this context. I think the best thing I want you to really take away from this is that the two countries have very different reasons why women are going to prison, right? So just to give you a quick snapshot, this is what one of my data collection tools look like, right? If you look at it, we ask questions across different domains, living situations, relationships, victimization, all of this so that women can actually pictorially see what their lives look like. So it's a very interesting conversation. In India, after trying to get access to prison 45 different times that I was rejected, I gained access to 3 different prisons, right? And I conducted all of these interviews, which I'm always happy to talk more about to anybody who's interested. It was rewarding, there was emotional burnout, but at the end of the day, I think I came out better because I was able to collect all my data, right? And of course, this was a long process from the beginning of my PhD till the end, right? So what did I find? Like, I'm going to jump right in and I'm going to tell you that Indian and Sri Lankan women go to prison for very different reasons. So among the 85 women that I interviewed in 3 Indian prisons, 67 of them were incarcerated for violent offenses, right? The second category, which is a very small number, was drugs and trafficking for 6, abduction, kidnapping, also 6. If you look within the violent offenses, you see a big number, almost 50%, go for dowry-related offenses. Switch to Sri Lanka. You see that the drugs, women are going to prison for drugs, followed by violent crime, and then property, right? So very different reasons as to why women are even being incarcerated. Look at the religious makeup. Again, it's a reflection of the population. Most of the women incarcerated were Hindus, followed by Muslims in India. And in Sri Lanka, you see Buddhists, followed by Hindus. Again, their relationship histories are so fascinating. Overarching number of women go to prison, in prison, had arranged marriages. Not the same in Sri Lanka. You see in Sri Lanka, most women had this sort of love affair, which I can't go into details to define, but you see that's not present in India. So from the offset, there was just so much going on, right? So just to like really give you a quick snapshot into what happened and what I'm finding is that in the West, we see childhood experiences, victimization experiences that lead women to prison. And similarly, in India and Sri Lanka, we see the same. But there's a little bit of a twist. In Sri Lanka, you see more women growing up in financial difficulties, right? So these are a couple of quotes that women, basically, that I'm going to read impromptu, right? She says, I was 12 years old then when my parents went off to work. It was just me with my 2 elder sisters at home. One day, my sister hit me and I complained to my father when he got back from work. He hit my sister with his belt. It left marks on her arms. This is one thing I will never forget, right? Let's move forward to India. Women don't report the same level of abuse at the hands of their parents. Now, that doesn't mean that abuse isn't happening. It could also be that culturally, it's not really allowed to be talked about, right? So we see more of financial difficulties being reported. A woman here saying, as children, we didn't have enough money to eat. There was only sadness. Staying in someone else's home was never pleasant. I got absolutely no happiness. So there are childhood difficulties both of them have faced, but the nuanced understanding is very different. Then the other very important claim that emerges in Sri Lanka is the physical and sexual abuse they face from their partners. Now, as I talked about earlier, please note that the relationship histories are very different, right? These are more love affairs, love marriages, right? So this is a great example of how a woman documents physical and sexual abuse. She says, he dragged me off by the hair, stripped me, took my clothes, locked them away in a cupboard. His sisters came to watch. They scolded me too. So she goes on to say how this person, her partner, has cut her hair, he buried her hair. So you can see she's a 48-year-old woman and she's documenting abuse very openly. Compare that to India. Yes, women have difficulties post-marriage, but the way they define it is very different. You see more in India, we have more women living in joint family setups. So you will hear them talk more about, I had difficulties with my in-laws, I had difficulties in different ways. So again, it's a very nuanced understanding. So she says, right, since I didn't have a mother-in-law, I was happy. A 25-year-old Neha says to me. So it's the idea that in-laws come with their own issues. So it's kind of expected. So if you get a good mother-in-law, that means you probably will have a good marriage. So I'm really simplifying it for the sake of time. But at the end of the day, I'm just making a case that context really matters. You can't take Western histories and, post them onto a context which is so different, right? And even within South Asia, and this is, I'm working on a paper right now which looks at domestic violence across 7 countries in South Asia. If anyone ever tells you South Asia is all the same, please make them read that paper that's upcoming. But it's not the same. Yes, geographically, that's what we're clubbed as, but it's a very Western concept, which really doesn't let you tap into the diversity of experiences. And I think when we're trying to address social issues such as women going to prison, why they kill, or many other, a contextual understanding is very important, right? It's very different from what we know of women who commit crimes in the West. So I know my 10 minutes are up, so I don't want to take too much time, but here are my details. Always happy to talk to anybody who's interested in doing any kind of South Asian criminal justice work. We need a lot more people doing this really rewarding work. So thank you so much for the time, and thank you for listening to me.